Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to episode 30 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. In this week's episode, A.J. and I share 5 tactics to help your church win the implementation battle. Making plans was never the biggest challenge in the revitalization process. It's turning those dreams into reality. Churches often struggle to gain momentum, and they get frustrated and burned out when their plans seem to fail. AJ and I empower you with 5 simple things your church can do to make sure your church wins at implementation. To read today's show notes, visit malphursgroup.com/30, malphursgroup.com/30. Now, let's dive in.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast, and we are talking about 5 tactics to win the implementation battle, the dreaded implementation battle, Scott, because this is where a lot of failure can happen. This is where a lot of stress comes in, and this is a very unknown part, I think, of revitalization as well. There's lots of things written about, talked about on what needs to be done and how do we do it? But really, in the end, you've got to roll up your sleeves and get to work. Mm-hmm. And this is the make or break portion, or phase of a revitalization process. So I'm glad we're taking this up today. And we've got kind of 5 key things that, Scott, you've written about this week in this week's article. So I'm looking forward to jumping into this.
Yeah, I would say this is the number one thing that we hear about from churches is that, and maybe complaint's not the right word, but just challenge that we hear about from pastors and other leaders is that, we've made plans in the past, but nothing happened, nothing changed. And so certainly there could have been flaws in the plan. And, we think our process for developing a plan is really good. But even with our process, the plan is just theoretical until you get to work. And so the challenge, and I call it the implementation battle, because it is a battle. You've got to engage and you've got to fight and you've got to want to do it. And so, but there are some tactics, 5 in particular, that sort of grease the wheels a little bit. There's no substitute for hard work, AJ. There's no way around that one.
Right.
But there are some ways to make it a little bit easier, and we want to talk through those 5 things today.
Yeah, I mean, at its core, the battle is a battle of physics. The energy mm-hmm. that it takes to overcome moving a stationary object into motion. And that's really, what happens in so many of the churches, especially churches that we deal with. There has been inaction. I mean, there's really not been any forward momentum into anything new or better. And that's what implementation and implementation teams are first tasked with, is getting over this inaction.
I want to push your metaphor even further a little bit, AJ.
Okay.
Because I think if you were to look at sort of the traditional life cycle chart for a church, birth, early growth, a late growth, plateau, early decline, late decline, death. Really what you have is in some churches, they are at a plateau. And at that point, you're trying to just overcome inertia, just the fact that we have stopped and now we've got to start a new S curve and we got to push this thing up a hill.
I see where you're going with this. And at a plateau, you would need to overcome 1G. I mean, you've got one measurement of gravity because you're on a flat plane.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And when you're in early decline, now you've got some downward negative momentum that you have to overcome first before you can start pushing that thing up.
Love it. Yeah.
And the further you are in decline, the harder it is to halt that negative momentum.
Yeah. Pushing my understanding of science, you're actually gaining downward velocity, and and it will require more energy to change direction.
That's exactly right. That's why if you're too far down it, that's when we say, you're really not in a revitalization situation. You're in a replanting situation because mm-hmm. the downward momentum is so severe. There's just no opportunity to turn this thing around at this point. So the work we do at the Malphurs Group, we're trying to catch churches in that early to sort of just starting into late decline point where there's still critical mass, enough people to hold that, that stone from rolling all the way down the hill, and then starting a new S curve and moving back up. It's definitely possible, but the further you are into decline, the more energy and dedication it takes to arrest that downward momentum and start something new.
Love this. All right. First thing that you've got down is to choose fewer projects to work on. So this sounds counterintuitive, like, because we've got a lot of things that need to change. So why fewer things?
Well, it's really pretty simple. Would you rather get 3 things done or say you're going to do 10 things and do 0?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what it boils down to, is churches overcommit and overextend, and they say, here's 10 things. They look at who they want to be 5 years from now, and they think we've got to get there in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is you don't have to get there in a year. You should get there in 5 years. And goal number 1, like we've just talked about, is to arrest the negative momentum. And if we can get to that point in year 1, that's great. And then, and as we move into year 2, can we reverse the trend? Can we start something new? And then that's going to start to pick up steam and so on and so forth. And so it's taking the long view and saying we don't have to get 15 things done. If things are that bad, where truly, you got to do 15 things for the church to survive, you're probably not in a revitalization space at that point. You're probably at a replanting situation, which is a different conversation. But for most churches, we're talking about churches that are averaging between 40 and, typically between 40 and 200, could be a little bit smaller, could even be a little bit larger than that. But a declining church that has critical mass and has resources, goal number 1 is just to arrest negative momentum, and then, plan for year 2. You can pick up 3 things next year.
Right. Yeah, we definitely see this as a benefit to not try to focus on too many things. There's such victory, in getting something done, and it brings in so much energy and momentum. So yeah, fewer things, get them done, and then tackle a few more things, and you'll have more energy going into that next group of tasks than you did the first time, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you've watched. My wife and I used to be really into The Biggest Loser. Ever watch that show, The Biggest Loser? And you'd watch some folks who'd they'd drop during the show. They would drop, 100, 150 pounds, just amazing amount of work and effort that they put into it. And then a year or 2 later, they're back up to whatever weight they were, because they didn't see it as a process. They saw it as a moment. I gotta drop this weight for this show and this thing, and they put all this energy and effort, and then they're kind of back where they were. If you were to take the process view and go, we're not going into a revitalization moment. We're looking at this as a process. And if I see it as an ongoing process that I don't have to lose 150 pounds in 3 months. I can lose 30 pounds this year, and I can lose 30 more pounds the year after that. And I can, stack those wins. And that's what we want to see, at least in our work with churches. We don't want you to just implement all of these changes in 1 year, and then next year you go back to doing the same things you've always done.
Right.
We're looking at long-term culture shift changes. And so you're more likely to get there by tackling 3 things the right way than 30 things the wrong way.
Yeah. And really, of course, working with us, those fewer projects that we're going to help you develop are going to more likely be, systemic changes, culture changes, something significant that will have a lasting impact.
That's right.
Yeah. That's really good. So the second thing you've got down here is assign tasks to owners. And as we go through this list, people are going to probably begin to say, wow, these sound like really elementary things. Hey,
yeah, but people don't do
spoiler
them.
alert, they are. Yeah. But people don't do them.
They don't do them. So yeah, this is another common mistake, is that pastors do all the work. And so we say, we've got these 3 or 4 or 5 different projects we're going to take on, and the de facto leader for all of these projects is, the pastor, or the pastor and 1 or 2 other staff people, and that's not good. Management would be the pastor's role and the staff's role, but in terms of executing tasks, that should be delegated further down the pipeline. Just take an Ephesians 4 mentality. We're equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, and that's critically important. Like, if you want to succeed at this long term, and you want to be good at implementation long term, you cannot be so reliant upon staff to get all of the work done. And so
Yeah.
break it down and go, who's best suited to take on this task? And when we're working with churches in our process, I never let the senior pastor lead any implementation team, be sort of the primary point person for
Mhm.
any task. I make sure that they function as a shepherd, that they're the ones kind of following up and overseeing the action plan and saying, okay, Jimmy, you said that this is what you wanted to get this done this month. What did your team get done? And if the team didn't get done, then the senior pastor can apply pressure to whomever he needs to, or if there's a resource gap, he can try and get that money. But if you can't function in that sort of shepherding and managerial role, if you're stuck in the weeds.
Yeah.
So it's not that those tasks are beneath you. They're not. It's just that you can't do what only you can do, which is go get resources or apply pressure or do this or that, if you're, stuck in the weeds.
I remind, teams of this constantly, especially, once we get to this kind of step in our process of developing what these, kind of big year-long projects might be for them. I am constantly like, this is not on your pastor's back. And you end up getting kind of like this nervous laugh also, like this guilty laugh, like, we
Yeah.
don't really know who's going to do it if he's not, but,
Uh-huh.
we're going to try. Because that's how everything has worked up till this point. And
Right.
you, pastor, listening to this are like, amen. It's always on me. So,
I will often find, and and I can relate to this on some level, but it's not uncommon for the pastor to have a particular area that he's passionate about.
mhm.
Well, I like this thing. I like first impressions, or I like discipleship, or I like whatever. And so you want to take over that project because you're passionate about that area. And so it takes a little bit of self-control to say, I'm not going to be the one who's running this project, even though that's kind of like my pet thing that I love. So I think pastors are sometimes just as guilty of throwing themselves into the weeds as congregations are of expecting that their pastor would be stuck in the weeds.
Yeah, it definitely takes some restraint to open your hands up and let something go that you might hold pretty close right now.
For sure.
Yeah. But there's great benefit to that if you can get over that hump yourself. All right. Number 3, you've got down to define due dates. So another one that people might say, yeah, you have to
Mhm.
have due dates, but think about your last project. How well was it organized and ran, and were people held to this?
Yeah, this is not rocket science, but again, churches don't do it, or they do. I think churches often do set due dates, but they're like imaginary guidelines that they, like, it'd be nice if it was done by this
Yeah,
time.
and people don't seem to really feel too terribly stressed about breaking those dates. We're just saying,
They
yeah, we're just not done. We're not ready.
The stakes aren't high enough, right? So they're like, yeah, I don't know, you know. And that's just not good. And so it just kind of goes back to the pastor's role. The pastor's role is to oversee those timelines. And this is when it's helpful that if you have kind of 2 or 3 different projects, and on some levels they might overlap. Like, Group A can't get their thing done until Group B completes this task. When they start to see that the interconnectedness
Mm,
of that, then there's a little bit of pressure to get their thing done on time. Kinda like when you're building a building, it's like, the paint folks can't come in until the sheetrock people are done floating it. Like, there's
mhm.
all that stuff has to happen. So, um, I don't wanna get too far ahead into the next couple of points, but if you set the due dates, that at least helps, and then there can be accountability for that at that point, if from the pastor, and from the team leaders to say, "Okay, we said we were gonna do X by this time, and it's not done, and why is it not done?"
Yeah. And monitoring those due dates, which also I don't want to get too far ahead here, but yeah, I mean, if you have a due date that's 2 months out, you don't want to find out where that is 3 days before that next meeting. You want to find out, at several waypoints in between. How are you tracking towards a due date? So.
Well, and you want to set realistic ones. I mean, that's the other thing is a church can get too ambitious with the number of projects that it takes on. Church can get too ambitious with how quickly they think they can get things done.
Yeah.
And neither of those things are good. If a church gets too ambitious about their timeline, then when things inevitably fail because it was too ambitious, then that builds to that sense of, oh, we just can't get things done, or it makes the due date feel less serious because, well, we knew that was kind of ambitious anyway. I mean, I was just going through this yesterday with a group I was working with, saying, all right, here's the critical pathway. These are the two things that have to get done within a month.
Yeah.
But there were other things that we were saying, it's more realistic to, initially I was saying, hey, do you think we could get this done by December? And as we started talking about it, and we started talking about all kind of the barriers and hoops that have to get jumped through by December, we said, let's say Easter. Let's say Easter 2021. And that can feel bad. You can go, gosh, I really want to get it done this year.
Mm-hmm.
But wouldn't you rather get it done at all than to set a due date that's unrealistic and it not happen, which is what happens. When you set an unrealistic due date, it's just likely not to happen at all.
Well, I think it's also helpful to after like, big milestone things are set. I mean, huddle up then with your smaller team, your implementation team, and really get granular about every step along the way that's going to have to get done, because then you can take smaller bites, and you can help build that momentum. So if you have something that's 2 months out, that's a big thing, and you haven't really thought through all the small steps to get there and who is going to do the small steps, it's much easier to miss a deadline and to not accomplish anything. But you break it down, make it really small and granular, and just check off, one step at a time. Then
That's right.
Your team can get there.
Again, you take the process mindset and go, remember that the people in your church they have full-time jobs. They've got families. They've got obligations. It's not like a business. You can't say, we're going to get these projects done and we're going to get it done this quarter. Like, you can't take that approach. You got to go, all right, we're going to take a year to get this thing done. We're going to get this thing done this month. We're going to stack up this easy win. Then we're going to do this thing. It's low-hanging fruit. And then we're going to do this thing. And when you meter it out like that and you set these due dates and you begin to hit them, it gives people confidence that they can continue to hit them, and you hit a stride. So I'm just, you're way better off taking that sort of the
slow and steady
wins the race approach.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next point here is just meeting regularly. I love this one, actually. I think this is really key.
Yeah, churches ask me all the time. I think I probably get this question, I don't know, I don't want to exaggerate, but I get it a lot. At least once a month, maybe, I don't know. About what's the difference between success and failure in churches that go through a revitalization process. And my answer is always the same. Churches that meet, like their implementation teams, if you've not gone through our process, you maybe don't have implementation teams, but whomever is working on your projects, however you define that group of people needs to meet together once a month. And the churches that meet together get stuff done. Yeah. The churches that quit meeting, they quit working. It is the number one differentiating factor. And I think it's as simple as this. There's a bit of peer pressure. If I'm going into a meeting and I'm supposed to have gotten something done and I've not done it, I'm going to be embarrassed. And so there's a little bit of social pressure to get it done. If I know that the meeting might get canceled because they usually get canceled, or it's going to get pushed back a week, or it's going to this, whatever, and the meeting's not that important, or, regularly the meeting happens, but most people don't show up, all those kinds of things, people are going to stop working because it shows that you don't really care about it. So the number one differentiating factor between successful churches and unsuccessful churches are the successful churches continue to meet and talk about the work and talk about their progress. And the ones that fail are the ones that quit meeting.
That's right.
And so I would say on that note, let's say you've got a team of 15 people, you've got 3 projects you're working on, there's 5 people on each team. And unless it's a holiday and you have to move it because of a holiday, other than that, you should always meet. Even if all 15 people can't show up. I regularly encounter churches that will be like, oh, Sally can't be there, and James can't be there, and Rebecca can't be there. That's 3 people gone. Let's pick a different date.
Yeah.
No, it should be the same time every month.
Yeah, right.
And you meet.
Yep. Yeah, third Saturday, from 8 to 10 or whatever you need to do.
Whatever it is. We typically say about 90 minutes is all you need. So, find a 90-minute block once a month, keep it the same time, and you meet. If only 7 can be there, only 7 are there. But you continue to meet so that you show the importance of those meetings.
Yeah.
If they're constantly moving, then people will be like, when is it again? And, oh, I'm busy. And, so it's really important.
Differentiator. Yeah. And it brings to mind for me, Hebrews 10:25, let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. And all the more as you see the day approaching. This has far-reaching implications. So
it does. I know we always think about that in terms of just worship services, and that's certainly true. But it's also gathering together to get work done. I mean, that's
right.
Ultimately what it's about. Paul's talking about, or the writer of Hebrews, I should say, is about running the race well. And running the race well means a faith that works, and a faith that's active, and a church that's active. So don't quit meeting.
Amen. Last point, Scott, measure your results. Hey, if we're going to do something, let's figure out if we're doing it well.
Yeah, what gets measured gets done. And if you don't have any sort of a dashboard for success, that's a problem. You need a dashboard. You need to know, are we going fast or are we going slow? I tell churches all the time, I just said this yesterday to the group I was working with last night. I don't really care if you hit your goal or you don't. It really does not matter to me, because what it does, it just gives you information. So if you didn't hit your goal, then you know that what you were doing wasn't working. So that's information that you can use to go, oh, hey, we should probably make some changes. Conversely, if you hit your goal or you surpassed your goal, then that tells you, hey, the thing we did works. So let's, maybe find ways to improve it or whatever, or leverage it. But
all too often, I think church, they might throw a measure down and they don't get the desired result. And that means this was the wrong thing to do. And they stop doing it altogether instead of, hey, we need to change something about what we're doing to reach our goal instead.
Yeah, 100%. And so I'm, I understand kind of why churches are, I try to empathize a little bit on why churches are, have an aversion to measurements of things, but I don't really get it because it's only becomes an unhealthy obsession if you make it an unhealthy obsession. Because I really don't care if you hit your goal or not, but you don't know, are we, particularly if, the way that we build a dashboard is it's tied to disciple making. So, if we say, hey, we're about making disciples, here's how we make disciples, here's how we know if we're doing that, that's the dashboard. That to me seems like a good thing to want to measure. And at any rate, you need a dashboard. And I would suggest be sure that you monitor that dashboard at those monthly meetings. If you set a goal and the only time you measure it is at the end of the year and you either hit it or you didn't, that is garbage for you. I mean, what good is that? You can't act off of that. You can't adjust. You can't adapt. You can't get better. You either hit it or you didn't.
Yeah.
So be sure that you're monitoring that dashboard, particularly once you've had like maybe a month or two worth of work, you've been working on something, then start using that dashboard to tell you, are we accelerating? Are we decelerating? Are we staying the same? And that will be helpful to you to know what adjustments you need to make.
Yeah. You've got to maintain morale in all things. And so, you wait too long, you get a bad result. Now you've not only do you have to try to figure out how to keep that particular project moving ahead? Now you've got a new project. How do we overcome the lack of morale that we now have because we waited too long to know if we were doing the right thing or not? So
I have a feeling there are people listening to this podcast right now who are saying, gosh, this sounds like a lot of work. And I kind of want to say, yeah. I mean, I don't know how you think things happen. It's through work.
It is. Yeah.
Like there's,
we got battle in the title for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you thought that you could just make a plan and order a couple banners and it was going to transform your church, you were sorely mistaken.
Yeah.
It's hard work and dedication, and it's why it can't all fall on one person's shoulders. If you share the load, it's not too much, but it does take attention. You have to pay attention, and that can be hard. You got, as a pastor, you're paying attention to are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? It's paying attention to the people who are on your team who are supposed to be executing tasks. Then if they're not, finding out why. Are they, how are they doing spiritually? Are they okay? Are they burned out? Do they have the resources they need? Is this task better suited for a different person? Like, you have to be present in that moment and paying attention, and that's the work. You can't just make a plan and expect that it's going to come together. It's not real life.
Well, yeah. And that should be a bit of a reality check. Going back to our initial analogy, of physics and moving something uphill or trying to make something that's going downhill move. If things are going, fairly good and you've got momentum in a positive direction, you probably are moving uphill and you've already got energy behind it. If this is very hard and you're finding it very challenging, it's probably because you are sliding downwards and it's requiring much more energy to change the direction of your church. So, take that as just another indicator. If you haven't been measuring things, but you are finding it very hard to change, you probably are on the downhill slope of a life cycle.
Yeah.
And you're just going to have to put that much more work into it.
Not to plug us too much here, but I want to say one of the things I'm really proud of that's sort of a new change for us. Implementation coaching has always been a part of our process, so this is not new. But we're really excited to share that a new development on our team is the creation of the implementation specialist position. So we have a team member whose sole job is to make sure that churches succeed. They're not, worried about, next weekend they're flying to Minneapolis or whatever. Like you've got their undivided attention to help you succeed. Yeah. And that, so far as I know, I'm not sure that anybody else is providing that level of attention and concierge type level care to make sure that you have your hand held through this process, because we know that it's hard and we know that it's the biggest challenge. And so, I'm also happy to say, again, AJ, I hope I'm not doing too much self-promotion here, but I think that I feel almost confident that we have the most affordable process that has that level of care.
I would be surprised to find that we did not. Yes.
Yeah, it'd be shocking. So if you're overwhelmed listening to this episode going, I don't know if I could do that, know that you don't have to do it alone, and that help is more affordable than you think it is.
Yeah.
And so reach out to us.
Really, Scott, this list has been some of the most significant improvements in our process that we've made over the last couple of years, because we've really focused on having churches take on fewer projects, defining where their greatest successes will be made, and then helping them assign tasks to owners to recap our list, define due dates, continue meeting regularly, and deciding and then tweaking what to measure and how to measure it to make sure that they're achieving the success that they're trying to achieve. So, this list that we're talking through today really is how we help churches make more disciples.
Right. At a sort of a 30,000 foot level.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. This is what we tell churches all the time. So listen, we love you. We want to see you succeed. We really do. And we know that it's possible. I never want a church to feel hopeless. There is hope. You can do this. You can do this. And we'd love to help you.
Yeah, so you can find out more about this in Scott's article today out at malfersgroup.com/30, the number 30. This is our 30th episode of the Church Revitalization podcast. Woohoo! Another 10 milestone. And so, yeah, if there's anything else that you would like to discuss on this topic, for sure, you can comment out on that article or reach out to us. You can email us at info@malfersgroup.com. Thanks for joining us today on the Church Revitalization Podcast. We'll be back next week with some more fresh revitalization material. God bless you.